Welcome to G20 The Indian Story, a special series of interviews with key people involved in the preparatory process. Our guest today is Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, who is presently in the Jindal University, International Affairs and Global Initiatives. He was a former ambassador to France and also Bahrain, and he is a well-acknowledged thinker, writer, and diplomat. Welcome, Dr. Mohan Kumar.
Sir, thank you very much.
I read your recent piece about the prospects of the G20 summit. You're fairly optimistic, I think, that it will achieve several things. But many questions remain, particularly the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war, which, strictly speaking, is not on the agenda of the conference. G20 is not the Security Council, though I wish it was, because G20 seems to be more representative, and without the veto, to me, it is a dream Security Council. Anyway, that apart. But as you say, whatever happens on 9th and 10th, give it to the Indians. This is how you start. Can you explain it? What have the Indians done so far?
In my conversation with the Italians, the Saudis, the Indonesians, and also the Brazilians, and by the way, I must tell your audience that the Brazilians are viewing Indian leadership with some trepidation because they have been openly telling me, listen, we can't do all this that you have done. I think what we have done is to take the G20 to the different corners of the country. And while some might argue that maybe overdoing it, my own sentiment is, I think we have taken a lot of pride in hosting the event. We have invested in showcasing India, and I'm absolutely sure this investment will pay returns in the medium to long term. So from a tourism, investment, and trade perspective, I think India has put its best foot forward. I don't think the logistics, the hospitality, and just the sheer variety of the venues can ever be replicated in the G20. So that part of it, you must give full marks to the government and to the Indian officials who I think have worked day and night to make this happen. Having said that, I think you have to divide the substantive outcome into two parts. One is, as you said, Ukraine. The other, as you say, is the rest. I would prefer to call it the rest. I think I expect a substantive outcome in the rest of the agenda. That's why I'm optimistic about the G20 meeting on 9th and 10th. And I'm happy to explain in detail what I mean by the agenda of the rest. But on Ukraine, you're right. I think we continue to have a problem. The same language which everyone agreed in Bali, suddenly Russia and China are saying they do not agree with the language.
Except, I believe one paragraph now they have agreed, according to a report I saw, 3 and 4. The third, apparently there is an agreement, but fourth is still creating problems. Yeah.
Correct, sir. One paragraph, which I think previously they disagreed to, you're quite right. It talks of the UN principles, territorial integrity, and Prime Minister's famous words.
Yes.
Prime Minister
Not the time for.
Yeah, today's era is not the era of war. But even so, I think the G7 insistence that there must be a paragraph on Ukraine is, I think, the key challenge for India. But I think India will do its best to be the bridge between the North and the South. But ultimately, if countries cannot agree to language on a consensus basis, I don't think you can blame the host for it. That's what I'm trying to say. And that is why I remain largely optimistic. You're quite right.
But you may not blame the host, but you may wish that India could do that, because you and I have seen many international conferences. India has always played a moderating role. That is why I think there is an expectation that India might be able to do something. But as you said, this should not be the yardstick by which we measure the G20 conference.
I absolutely agree with the last part of what you say. It should not be. But responding to your important point about why India has not been able to play a mediatory role, if you like, My sense is Prime Minister Modi tried in the initial stages, when the students were being evacuated. I think he was having a conversation with both leaders. My sense is that very quickly, Prime Minister Modi and India came to the conclusion that it was impossible to play a mediatory role because the positions were far apart. Of course, there are others who came to the same conclusion, which is South Africa tried its hand, Saudi Arabia tried its hand, everybody has tried. I mean, Lula tried from Brazil. I pay credit to Indian diplomacy for coming to this conclusion early on that the positions between Russia and Ukraine are unbridgeable. And everything that I have seen since then makes me believe that our assessment was correct, because there is absolutely no chance of a diplomatic solution in the near future. Both sides believe there is something to be gained in fighting it out in the battlefield.
I suppose this is because of the situation on the field, in the field, because neither thinks that it is going to lose. So only if somebody feels that I'll lose unless I take this opportunity, he will not go to the negotiating table. Both sides feel that they are going to win. So that situation has to change. No other consideration can make a substantial difference to this, one feels.
You are spot on, sir. You are spot on. That is exactly what it is.
But looking at the conference from the other perspective, as you say, the other issues, have we tried to reform the multilateral system indirectly through G20? Is that what we are doing consciously?
I think what we are doing is three things. One, we recognize the UN system is defunct, moribund, whatever word you want to use.
Dysfunctional,
What we are
paralytic.
trying to do through the G20 is a reform of the more important aspects of multilateralism. For example, I want to talk a little bit, if you allow me, on the form of the multilateral development banks that we are trying to do. The Encasing Lawrence Summers Committee was established by India. They have come up with a roadmap for a reform of the multilateral development bank, that is either the IMF or the World Bank. And there are a number of recommendations which have been made. Now they will come up with the second part of the report in October. All this is basically to do three things. One, to increase lending for SDGs and climate action for poorer countries. Two, to deal with the problem of debt, because debt is a very, very serious problem, and to establish a global framework for expanding spending on digital infrastructure. So this is how we are being both the voice of the global south and reforming multilateralism. Reforming multilateralism, I don't think you should look for words like a reform of the UN Security Council, etc. That you may find a little bit of rhetoric and boilerplate language. But I think what India is doing is, in my view, significantly more important, which is make available funding through the multilateral development banks for climate change action for poorer countries and for SDGs.
Aren't we then playing into the hands of the Chinese, who have been trying to do this through BRICS, the establishment of a bank, a development fund? So finally, it all comes to money, nothing else. That's what it looks. And the Sherpa, Mr. Khan said that it will cost $6 to $7 trillion to settle this. So that will bring us in confrontation with the West on the one hand, and the Chinese agenda would be fulfilled in another way. Don't you see that danger?
Actually, it's interesting you talk about the Chinese role, because what India is trying to do through Encasing Lawrence Summers Committee is to augment the resources of the World Bank and the IMF directly in contradiction to China's New Development Bank and China's BRI.
Oh, is that different?
Is to provide an alternative to lower income countries so that they don't fall into the debt trap of China. It'll be interesting to see how the Chinese react, of course. We will see that on 9th and 10th.
As far as the participation, that's become an issue. It has never been an issue. International conferences, who goes is unimportant, because whoever goes represents the country concerned. But in this particular case, because these two gentlemen, Putin and Xi, are important players here, their not being there, has it affected the, what shall we say, the importance of the conference or the relevance of it in this context?
Sir, I concede that it takes a little bit of the sheen of the G20 summit in Delhi, and I would have very much liked Putin and Xi Jinping to be there. But again, I think the geopolitical circumstances have changed substantially in the last 3-4 months. Particularly, I would say, in the case of China. Look at what they've done. The Chinese have put out a map. And today, I just read that Nepal, of all countries, has lodged a protest and said, we don't agree with the map. We are not talking India. We are not talking Philippines. We are talking Nepal. So I think China finds itself boxed into a corner, which is what I have tried to explain in my latest article. I really think the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want its leader to be exposed, where he will be asked questions about why China is supporting Russia in Ukraine, why China has put out a map, why the BRI initiative has led to debt diplomacy or debt trap and so on. I really think for them, the paramount leader is who he is, frankly, and nobody knows the prime minister, frankly. In the Chinese context, it is not impossible to argue that Xi Jinping's absence means that China is without clout, because we don't know what the prime minister is going to say or do, or whether he even has the ability to say and do anything. So in that sense, I agree with you. But the fact that both Russia and China have chosen not to come gives it a geopolitical complexion. They got the Sino-Russian joint statement. We are also hearing reports that Putin will attend the BRI summit in Beijing in October. Right. So it's also not possible for me to accept that Putin called Prime Minister Modi and gave an explanation that, listen, I can't come, etc., etc. But the fact is, a month later, he is going to be in Beijing. So it's not as if he has been not going to, places other than his own country. He didn't go to Johannesburg for a reason. We all know the ICC issue.
He might be arrested.
India, there was no problem. So in that sense, I agree with you. My own sense is that there are two inferences I will draw. One is a geopolitical inference. G20 is still seen as a Western structure by Russia and China, and they do find themselves boxed in. But I think for India, the question is, this will have implications for the bilateral relations between China and India. And that is something that we have to wait and see how that unfolds.
Well, the success of G20 will naturally elicit some envy, because whatever success, your personal success or the official success, there will always be people to criticize why you are doing this, not in the spirit of what was being done, for example. I read somewhere that somebody said Prime Minister Modi's election campaign started on 1st December 2022 when he took over. And that is why he's taking it to the villages of India, etc., etc. Do you see any justification in this criticism?
I was asked this question recently, and my response is that I think it's an insult to the intelligence of the Indian electorate if you think that you can do something like a G20 almost 1 year before the actual general elections and hope that they will continue to remember what happened in Bharat Mandapam and therefore vote for Prime Minister Modi in May next year. I really think it's a misreading of the Indian polity and the Indian political situation.
And coming to this global South issue, what has happened in Johannesburg is BRICS has taken on the mantle of the global South. I don't know where I'm right. And that is a bit of a contradiction, because how can you have a global South with China and Russia in it? So it is not G77 anymore, it is something more. If these two countries also participate in it and become part of the global South, the first brick of a new world order has been laid by the Johannesburg meeting. Would you agree with that?
My jocular response to your point about first brick is that it's all bricks and no mortar. That's my response, but that is a joke. It's not a serious...
that was the title of my article. on
I
SCO,
see.
on
I
SCO.
see. Yeah, it's all
No,
bricks and
no
no
mortar.
mortar is yeah, all bricks and no mortar is my reaction. I agree with you. The G77 is history. I was interviewed by the Asia Society in Hong Kong, and I don't think they liked it very much when I said that China does not belong to the global south. And the
Yes.
question asked me why. I said, well, you are a middle income country, you've abolished extreme poverty, your per capita is $10,000. I don't think you can legitimately claim to be part of the global south. I said the global south will look upon China as a lender, as a creditor, as a project assistance giver, but not as a leader of the global south. That is my personal view. It remains my personal view. And I'll just give you one example of where I think we have done a tremendous job of providing leadership to the global south, and that is the digital public infrastructure, where I have mentioned that the group has been, I've been talking to Rudra Chowdhury of Carnegie, who also participates in that group. That group has worked extremely well. And there has been an agreement in the working group on the G20, and I hope the G20 leaders' declaration will come up with a solid statement on digital public
Supporting.
infrastructure.
At the time of the pandemic also, the first country to talk about international cooperation. We even called SARC meeting. It's already we have discarded it, but a SARC meeting was
Absolutely.
held. And also
Absolutely.
G20 we brought in, we asked Saudi Arabia to hold a meeting, etc. So that way we have. But there is this contradiction here as to what is global south. You know, we broadly speak about it. Russia also will not fit into that. As you know, China was never a member of G77. They always said China, 77 plus China. You remember the Geneva days. They always came in, but they were not a member of it. And the Chinese diplomats continuously used to say, and it became a joke, because he would say, we are a developing country and we shall always remain so. How stupid it is to say so. But what they are saying is that they will not develop. What they are saying is we will be with the developing world. So they have that dichotomy about their relationship with the South. So the development of the South is still an open question, you agree, or the
I,
leadership.
I agree with you. There, I agree with you. It is up for grabs, the mantle of the global South leadership. I think it is something that we'll have to wait and see how the game unfolds. But I do, for example, I have suggested that India must call again all the 125 countries for the Voice of the Global South Summit, which we had in January, to seek their inputs for the G20 presidency. I have suggested we should have one more after the event, after the G20 summit, where the Prime Minister addresses the 125 countries, explains the efforts India made to get their priorities and concerns in the G20 declaration. Maybe we succeeded, maybe we failed, but we can at least explain to the 125 countries which participated in the Voice of Global South Summit that this is what we have done. It must not be a one-off summit. I think we should do it at periodic intervals, but I think they should do it after the G20 summit so that you explain to those 125 countries that this is what India has tried and to do in the G20.
It is good to do that, but I would say it would exacerbate the tension between India and China. China proposed the expansion of the BRICS, specifically to get in their friends there. And Russia supported them, South Africa supported them. So India initially was rejecting it, but we accepted it because it was. And there is also that open question, others can also come. So it may end up like the non-aligned movement. Everybody is non-aligned, then what is the relevance of the non-aligned movement? So that kind of a danger can also happen, or we will be in conflict with China to prevent that. And we will try to do various things in order not to expand it any further. So that possibility is also there if we are very open in seeking the leadership.
I agree with you. There is a risk that you are running. That's what you're saying, and that's correct. But I would argue no initiative is risk-free, and this is worth trying. And we've done it once. It seems to me that if you just leave it like that, it would seem like a one-off thing that you did for the sake of pro forma. So I believe that dialogue must continue.
Well, it's very much like the expansion of the Security Council also. We keep talking about it knowing fully well that this will not happen. So, because it is not because of the permanent five. you don't have two-thirds majority in the General Assembly. That is a fact that many people don't seem to realize. So something like that, I think we have to wait for our time and see how things develop. Well, thank you, Mohan, for this very interesting conversation. I know you have your finger in every pie, I notice. And so that's why I thought that your brain is worth picking. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much for having me, sir, and have a nice day.
Very good. Thank you. G20 The India Story എന്ന ഈ പ്രത്യേക പരിപാടിയിലെ രണ്ടാമത്തെ ഇൻ്റർവ്യൂ ഇവിടെ അവസാനിക്കുകയാണ്. മറ്റ് G20 ഇൻ്റർവ്യൂസുമായി നമുക്ക് വീണ്ടും കാണാം അടുത്ത ദിവസങ്ങളിൽ. നമസ്കാരം.